Hello, and welcome to this week's lesson on the American Revolution. This week, we are going to be looking at the year 1776 and key events that occurred during that year. We're always looking to answer the question, how? How were these American colonists, many who were not loyal to the king, but also not wanting to go to war, how were they able to become an independent nation? And how, when a third of your people are loyal to the king, they are loyal British citizens. So only about a third were really looking to fight, to rebel, and change the government. The other two-thirds might not have been happy, but they certainly didn't want to go to war. So how do you pull them in? How do you get them to support your cause? And do you? All right, so today we're going to look at the Declaration of Independence, the Battle of Brooklyn, Battle of Brooklyn Heights, Battle of Long Island. It goes by different names. And then Washington crossing the Delaware, which is better known to historians as the Battle of Trenton. We're going to look at causes for these, key people involved, and as always, the effects. So we have to first step back to 1774 and realize that the First Continental Congress, they're meeting, they're having committees of correspondence. This is when the colonists are realizing that things are coming to a head. There's tax after tax after tax after tax following the French and Indian War. When is it going to end? They have the Stamp Act. They meet. They get the British Parliament to repeal the Stamp Act. Then you get the Townshend Acts, which are taxes on many common items like lead and glass, and other things that the colonists need to import from England. That gets repealed. But then you have the Tea Act. And then with the Tea Act, you get the Boston Tea Party. And following the Boston Tea Party, you get the Coercive Acts. And so every time there's one tax, there's another result of what the colonists do. And sometimes it means that things get better for them. Often it means that something else is just going to happen. And it's just one thing after another, and it's just building up and piling up. We have the Minutemen that we talked about last week. The Minutemen are local militiamen. These were men that trained in their local neighborhoods, their local communities and villages. This was in place underneath the rule of George III. Being as they're colonies in a foreign land, and there's Native Americans who are not happy that these British colonists are taking their land and taking their resources, taking their deer and their fish, taking their forest land, there's going to be skirmishes. They're going to have to defend the right to take that land. You also have people on those border villages between New France and New Spain. New France to the north in the Ohio River Valley, and then more southern on the borders of Georgia with Spain. And so you have local militia who are there to protect the villages. And these are the very units that are going to become the backbone of the colonial fighting force. Of course, the first battles we learned about last week at Lexington and Concord. So they're two separate battles, but they happen within hours of each other, within miles of each other in Massachusetts. Right? And so the First Continental Congress meets in 1774, and they agree that they're going to come back in a year. Let's go away, go back to our homes, go back to our farms, see how things play out this next year, and then we'll meet again. So because we have the battles of Lexington and Concord, they meet a second time. And they say, this is the Second Continental Congress. Well, this is going to be the second and final Continental Congress. So during the course of the American Revolution, every time you have delegates meeting from the colonies, they are going to be members of the Second Continental Congress. And then at the end of the war, you're going to have different committees that meet to create a new government. All right, so during the first meetings of the Second Continental Congress, sorry to confuse you there, right? They form a Continental Army. They realize after the battles of Lexington and Concord that things are getting heated. The king's not happy either. Let's form an army. And at the same time, they're going to name George Washington commander in chief. I think interestingly about George Washington, he was at the First Continental Congress and he goes home. He's been in the British military before. In fact, he, in a way, started the French and Indian War. He was at the first battle of it. And so he knows there's a good chance they're going to have an army. He wants to lead that army. He wants to be a leader. So he comes back to the Central Continental Congress in a military uniform that he's designed, which is going to become the uniform. It's the navy and a buff tan color. And you see the stamp is taking after this image of Washington going to meet the Continental Army troops in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So the Continental Army, you will be paid if you are a member of that. You can enlist, and you enlist for a time of usually a year, possibly 2 years. That's it. And then you are free to go home. And so Washington basically knows he has a year with this army to make headway. If he wants to go into a second year, if it's necessary to go into a second year of fighting, he's going to have to do something to keep troops enlisted and to get more soldiers to enlist, which means you've got to win. So at the same time that they're forming this army, and this is sort of like their plan B, they've got a plan A. Let's send out a peace offering. And this is what's known as the olive branch petition. So an olive branch is seen as a symbol of peace. And they send a letter to King George III saying, hey, George, could we just take a break? Could we just sit down and talk about this as honorable men? Nobody wants to go to war. Nobody wants to fight. It's going to cost you. It's going to cost me. It's bad news all around. The king sends back a quick and direct response of no. Nothing to talk about. In fact, he makes a proclamation to suppress the rebellion and sedition in the colonies. So sedition is the breakaway. King George is having none of it. Think about it like a parent when the kids are having a tantrum, and that's very much how King George III looked at the colonies. Like, these are his children. He's cared for them. He's looked out for them. He's nurtured them. And they're going to have a tantrum, a public tantrum? No, you don't get your way because you're crying and screaming. And now you're saying you're sorry? No, you've gone too far. You're going to be punished. All right, so we have some skirmishes that happen in the winter of 1776. In fact, the Continental Army is very successful in pushing out the British out of South Carolina, out of Charleston area where this big harbor and port. And big moment, they meet and sign a Declaration of Independence in July of 1776. So now let's talk about that declaration. Okay. Declaration is going to refer back to the two other times that they have reached out to King George. It says, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble of terms. And what that means is we have asked you, we sent you a letter, 2 letters, in fact, asking you to stop this fighting, for us to come sit at a table and talk about our problems and come to a peaceful agreement. And yet, our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. And so it's like every time we ask, please, could we meet? You're like, no. And you send more soldiers. Please, could we have peace? No. And you send more soldiers. And so we have to think about who is the audience for the Declaration of Independence. The audience, 3 different key groups. Number 1, King George III. 2, all of the people living in the 13 colonies. Remember, the Continental Congress, if they're going to have a war, if they're going to successfully maintain independence from the greatest and most powerful military on the planet at that time, they're going to need the support of all the people living in the colonies. 3, the leaders and people of the world. This is a public announcement. This is not something, they're not going behind somebody's back. This is like, I am putting it on Facebook. I'm putting it on Snapchat. It's going to be on TikTok. People are going to know. Everyone's going to know. I'm going to name who we're angry with. I'm going to ask for the support of everybody I know. And that's all the people living in the colonies with us and the other great nations of the world. So there's 3 parts to the Declaration. It's written for 3 groups of people, but it can also be broken down into 3 separate parts. The preamble, pre, coming before, right? And amble, to walk. So this is the introduction. It tells the purpose. Why are they writing this document? Right? When, in the course of human events, sometimes things happen, it becomes necessary for one people, the colonists, to dissolve the political bands, the government, which have connected them with another government. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they, the colonists, should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We're going to tell you why we're breaking up with England. And so the purpose of this is a breakup letter. It's a public breakup notice. Right? And so there's a lot more wording here. We see to assume among the powers of the earth, again, that's the nations of the world, the separate and equal station. That even though you have England and you have the colonies, the people in both of those places are equal. And they're equal under the rights of the laws of England, the English Bill of Rights, signed in 1688. They're also equal if we go back to the Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke, that all people have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it also says, if you're going to break up with somebody, you should really explain why. Give your side of the story. So that's where the body of the Declaration is. Most people know the preamble. Few people take time to look at the grievances. There's actually 27 specific reasons that the writers of the Declaration said were reasons why King George has taken away their basic rights and why the colonies have to break up. Some of them make sense and are very specific, like the closing of the port of Boston. Others are a bit exaggerated when you read them. Okay, so it's saying in every stage of these oppressions will be the unfair taxes, the quartering of soldiers or keeping of soldiers. We have petitioned for redress, we the colonists. So when it talks about we, it's we as in all of us, all of the colonists. These are delegates representing them. Okay. And in conclusion, that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. So it says, because of all these reasons, we have no other recourse but to separate from England. We'd love to stay to be a part of England, but we have tried and tried and tried. It's like we have tried to ask for help. We have tried to ask for counseling on this, and you don't want to make it work. So we agree with you. We're going to end it. So looking at this image, you see John Hancock, who one of the first signers, and he said he was going to write his name big enough that the blind king sitting over in England could see it from across the ocean. He wasn't blind, but he did wear glasses. All right. Here I just have a little bit on background. So Timothy Matlack, you see the man in this lovely blue suit, right, the burgundy jacket. He's the one who actually lettered it. He's the one who actually wrote this. So if you're wondering whose penmanship this is, it is Timothy Matlack. He's the one who actually penned it out by hand. This was not done with just a type at first. It was actually written out by hand. And Matlack did that. So this other painting that we're going to look at, a long rectangular painting, I think it's 12 foot by 18 foot. It hangs in the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. in the Rotunda. It was actually commissioned to be painted in 1817. So it was not painted at the time of the signing of the Declaration. All right, and so these are the committee of 5 who actually wrote the document. All the ones with stars next to their names become presidents. So we have number 1, John Adams, who becomes the second president. We have Roger Sherman, who goes on to, he's the only person that actually wrote signed all 4 of the major documents. The Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence. He signed that, and there's one other one. I can't think of it right now. We have Robert Livingston. We have Thomas Jefferson, who goes on to become the 3rd president, and Benjamin Franklin. So Benjamin Franklin, he is very vital, and we're going to talk about him in getting money and allies. He is sent to England from the First Continental Congress. He is later going to be sent to Paris as an ambassador. He's also going to be sent to Holland. John Adams is going to be sent. So these men don't fight. We're not going to see them in battle gear. These men are going to be ambassadors. Specifically, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin are going to be in Europe for most of the Revolution. They're going to be working as ambassadors, trying to get assistance with gunpowder, with uniforms, with funding, with soldiers. All right. So Independence Hall in Philadelphia, you can go to tour the building today. It's a lot smaller than it looks right there. And then, so after the Declaration is signed and read, then it's going to be printed, and it's also going to have to be read in each of the colonies, and the colonies have to vote on it. So this is representative government. This is not just some people deciding on their own. They are delegates of the colonies. They're going to go back to the colonies, and then once the colony local government approves it, then it becomes ratified and becomes a true document of the colonies and later the United States. So following that, in fact, just a few weeks after the Declaration, we're going to have the first big battle, the Battle of Brooklyn. Right? Brooklyn is a borough in New York City. There's 5 boroughs. It's also on Long Island. So this battle is sometimes known as the Battle of Brooklyn Heights, sometimes known as the Battle of Brooklyn, sometimes known as the Battle of Long Island. Just depends what you're reading. So this is in August of 1776, and let me tell you, it is hot. I grew up there. It is hot. It is steamy. I would not want to be fighting a battle. No. But how many soldiers? We have 30,000 soldiers are going to go to battle in over a week's time. 10,000 Continental soldiers under the direction of George Washington. 20,000 British soldiers under the direction of General William Howe. So, it's a disaster. The British outnumber the American forces 2-1. They are better equipped, they are better trained, and they are coming with a vengeance. So Washington does what turns out to be a bit humiliating, but in hindsight, the best thing. He retreats. He moves his army back. So he goes from Brooklyn across the river to Manhattan Island. General Howe follows him with his British soldiers. They go from Manhattan Island into New Jersey. So there's rivers that separate Brooklyn on Long Island from New York City and Manhattan Island to New Jersey. And so you see in the stamp image the boats that they're having to use to cross. And that's why it says he saves his army. This was a British win. Now, Washington could have surrendered at that moment. It was that much of a defeat. He could have just said, I give up. Possibly the revolution would have ended at that point. Signers of the Declaration probably would have been captured, gone to trial, and probably executed for treason. So the next major battle is going to be a few months later in Trenton, New Jersey. There's this famous painting that was also painted in the 1800s, highlighting the event before the battle, Washington crossing the Delaware River. So the date of this event is December 24th. Okay. What Washington is doing is also known as guerrilla warfare. It was unheard of at this time to fight on Christmas. It's typically in winter, battles would stop because nobody can get supplies. Your wagons get bogged down in the mud. It's freezing rain. It's just miserable. Who wants to fight in the winter? Let's just go back to our camps. We rest, we regroup. We'll meet you back in spring. We'll finish the battle. So there's a troop of Hessians, and Hessians are German soldiers that were hired by the British to help them. The British had the money. And so they're hanging out on the outskirts of a peach orchard in Trenton, New Jersey. Washington knows they're there. He plans this attack as a surprise attack. Now, it's really not a surprise because, you know, that Battle of Brooklyn, camping out, it's miserable. Look at the weather. It's blizzard temperatures. It's freezing. It's below freezing. You have some people leaving the Continental Army, some deserters. They actually go and tell the Hessians, tell somebody in the British Army, Washington's planning to attack. You need to be ready. He's coming for you. And the leader of the Hessians just basically balls up the note and says, get out of here. Get out of here, right? He's not going to come at us. It's Christmas. Who fights on Christmas? And so they just go about their business. And Washington gets a late start because there's a blizzard that evening. It seems like everything's going against him. He successfully crosses that river. Well, after the river, and this is what a lot of people don't talk about, after the river, they have a couple kilometers that a couple of miles that they have to hike. This is not like you cross the river and boom, we're going to start fighting. This is like cross the river. Okay, guys, now we're going to march for a couple of hours on Christmas Eve or Christmas morning in the freezing cold, in a blizzard. It's miserable. So let's talk about the men in the picture. In the center, we have the American flag, right? There's a lot going on here. You see dawn coming up. It's getting bright as he goes across to the shore. It's leaving in the dark of night. There's ice flows in the river, and there probably were. It was wintertime, obviously. But this painting is a great cross-section of the people living in the colonies. In the front, we have some frontiersmen or long hunters, right? You see the fur hat, right? He's guiding the boat. We have another man here who's also helping to row in the front, and he's wearing a Scottish tam, showing his ancestry, where his family is from. On the other side, the far side, we have an African-American man rowing. And there was a great many black soldiers. A lot of them came with the Rhode Island unit because a lot of free men joined the army, but also a lot of slaves. And so at one point, Rhode Island was offering freedom to any slave who enlisted. And if you served a year, you could earn your freedom. We don't know who this man is, again, because this painting was painted in the 1800s after the event. But there would have been a lot of black Continental soldiers at this crossing with Washington. It was actually very good because they had to manage these ferries. And so you have these men from Rhode Island who were seasoned sailors. They were involved in shipping. And so they came in. It was wonderful that they were there to help them on the crossing. You see this man in the green. He has a bag that he's carrying, and that has artwork on it in the style from the Delaware Nation, Native American nation. We also see calm and chaos, right? You see the horses in the back. You see men working. It just like goes off in the distance. So he attacks 1,500 Hessian soldiers. Even though they were warned, they are completely surprised by the attack. It's a huge win. There's a lot of ammunition, supplies, cannons that they're able to take. It was a 2-hour battle. The Hessians retreat, similar to how Washington retreated. 3,900 soldiers fought. Americans this time outnumbered the British Hessians. And look at the casualties, 5 American casualties versus 900 British casualties. In fact, future President James Monroe was wounded. And Monroe is the gentleman holding the American flag. We also see Washington, this idea of calm. He's facing the enemy, knowing he's going into battle, knowing this is probably his last chance. If they had lost this battle, Washington would probably at least have lost his post. So the Battle of Trenton, you see the Delaware River in the bottom. And you also see the blue arrows, how the army had to march around and into the encampment. And then the red is going to be the Hessians and how they were surrounded by the Washington's troops. All right, so one thing to realize with the American Revolution, historically, it's going to influence many future revolutions. It's going to influence the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, Mexican Revolution, revolutions across Europe in the mid 1800s. And so here we have a French-speaking country, republic, who during the American bicentennial, the 200th anniversary in 1976, right here, they have a stamp showing the Hessians being captured at Trenton. And the reason I have the stamp here is because you can see the tannish yellow with the blue are going to be the Continental Army soldiers, and then the man with red with the blue is going to be a Hessian soldier. All right, so what major events do we look at this week? The Declaration of Independence, right? And that it actually has to go through a few different moments before it becomes signed and before it becomes legal. We talk about in August, the first battle after the Declaration is signed, after declaring independence from Britain. The Battle of Brooklyn is the first battle, and that is a loss. Then the next major battle that we talk about is Delaware Washington crossing the Delaware to fight at Trenton, and that is a win for the Patriots. So 1776, the year winds up with a win and a loss, right? And so this is where we are getting into, we're now at the winter of 76, going into 77. There's going to be some other turning points as we go into 1777. You have forms in the classroom that you can look at some more of these primary sources. I'm going to include extra videos to explain more of what's going on at this point in history. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know. I'll be glad to get back with you on that. All right, so just to review, Lexington and Concord, historians, consider to be the first battles of the American Revolution, but this is in 1774. This is before anyone has declared independence. So you have the battles at Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts. You have the Continental Army that's formed in Philadelphia. You have the Battle of Bunker Hill, which was a loss to the American colonists. It was a small battle, but it did help bring more people to the side of the Continental soldiers. If you want more information on that, just let me know. We have the Battle of Brooklyn, which follows the Declaration of Independence, and then we have the Battle of Trenton, which was a win. So if we look at the major things going on in 76, these three are the major things. Declaration of Independence would be first, then the Battle of Brooklyn, then the Battle of Trenton or crossing the Delaware.